Hi, Tony Howard here for Astrology University. This month we have the second of 3 exact hits between transiting Saturn and Neptune. In light of that, I'd like to share with you an excerpt from my presentation on Saturn-Neptune aspects in the birth chart. I'll be presenting the complete lecture for the Denver Astrology Group this weekend, so if you're in the area, stop by. You can also find a more extensive version of this presentation available for download at astrologyuniversity.com. So let's spend a little time with the chart of Oscar Wilde, who was born with natal Saturn square Neptune. Wilde was a poet, writer, and thinker known for his brilliant book, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and his timeless comedy, The Importance of Being Earnest. I reread The Picture of Dorian Gray in preparation for this research, and aside from just loving the book again, I found that every third sentence seemed to have a Saturn-Neptune quality. I'll share a few of those with you shortly, but let's start by looking at his chart. Wilde's Saturn square Neptune is underscored because of its prominent placement here on the angles, with Saturn on the midheaven and Neptune on the descendant. Wilde is a tragic figure in history because he was born ahead of his time. He paved the way for greater freedoms for others by having his own freedom curtailed. Although the labels gay and bisexual weren't used then, we could accurately describe him as a bisexual man. He was married to his wife, and by all accounts, it was a marriage grounded in real love and sexuality. He had 2 children. But after he was married, he also began having sex with men. And eventually he began a complicated relationship with a younger man named Alfred Douglas, nicknamed Bosie. Douglas had a strained relationship with his overbearing and abusive father, who also disliked Wilde for obvious reasons and began antagonizing him. In 1895, Douglas encouraged Wilde to sue his father for libel after his father publicly referred to Wilde as a sodomite in a local club. Against the advice of his friends, Wilde did so, but the whole thing backfired. So here's the chart for the start of a trial in April 3rd, 1895 in the outer wheel, and Wilde's chart in the center. Transiting Saturn was opposite his natal Pluto, and transiting Neptune was engaging his Saturn-Neptune square by conjuncting his natal Saturn and squaring natal Neptune. Halfway through the trial, it became clear that not only would he lose, but that real evidence had been dredged up against him, so Wilde called off the case. Unfortunately, it was too late. He was later arrested shortly after leaving, and the trial was picked up again, this time against him. So here's a chart for the start of the second trial, April 25th, 1895. Wilde lost the trial and was found guilty of gross indecency and sentenced to 2 years hard labor, which at the time was the harshest sentence the judge could make. When Wilde was released, he was a broken man, both physically and emotionally, and he died just 3 years later from spinal meningitis. So this is an especially tragic story given that at the start of this trial, he was at the height of his career to date. We can see the shadow side of Saturn-Neptune in Wilde's very real pain and suffering and his human rights struggle in this part of his story. And through it, he became a kind of martyr for the gay community, which is another expression of Saturn-Neptune, that martyrdom or self-sacrifice. For another side of Saturn-Neptune, though, let's take a quick look at Dorian Gray, which was first published July 20th, 1890. It's common for people with a strong natal aspect to take actions or be part of events that unfold later when that cycle repeats again, or when different versions of that cycle repeats. And that's the case here with Dorian Gray, which was released under a Saturn-Neptune square cycle, which was echoing and resonant with his natal Saturn-Neptune square. The square in 1890 was applying on the date of the book's release, and it would be exact shortly thereafter in August. By November of that year, transiting Saturn would cross his natal ascendant and square his natal Saturn. And the critical reception to the book was poor. The story was heavily criticized, and Wilde responded defensively by editing out the more blatant homoerotic references, which by our standards today are extremely tame. He also added more character development for Gray, who was criticized for his hedonism. But the poor reception at the time obviously didn't stop the book from becoming a timeless classic. So let's take a closer look at a few themes and quotes that reveal the Saturn-Neptune signature here. And remember that Wilde's Saturn was in Gemini and his Neptune in Pisces. For starters, we have a book about a magical painting, the painting being the real, the magical Neptune, and the painting Saturn. The painting itself conjures the dynamic between the real versus the ideal with the prominent Saturn-Neptune theme. We see reality reversals. The painting, which is under normal circumstances a reflection of the ideal or an imagined vision of the artist, instead becomes the living window on what is real. And the painting is in real time, while the man himself does not age. So captured like a painting. Dorian is in perfect physical form, but unchanging. The visual ideal manifest, and the book really takes up these themes. So the painting itself makes the spirit, Neptune, real or tangible. It captures something of the spirit, a moment or an ideal trapped in time, crystallized or made into form, Saturn. So a couple of great book quotes from the book. Nothing can cure the soul but the senses, and nothing can cure the senses but the soul. Can you hear the Saturn-Neptune there? The true mystery of the world is the visible, not the invisible. And it was one of those dreamless nights that make one almost enamored of death. So we also see themes of death kind of prevalent in the book. The book is preoccupied with an awareness of time, death, and aging. We have, of course, the aging of the picture, marking time through the changes in the image. And Dorian keeps returning to the picture to see what's happening, to kind of get a window onto what's happening now, what is now. We have the thought or dream of immortality. We have present versus future, and encapsulated simultaneously every time the living Dorian stands in front of the real aging picture. The book's also preoccupied with themes of youth and death. We have the decay of beauty, of youthful beauty, with Dorian representing the sublime, transcendent beauty, which is an expression of Neptune with Venus. A couple more quotes. Punctuality is the thief of time. Lord Henry, who in the book is kind of a bad influence on Dorian, says, "It's only the sacred things that are worth touching, Dorian." So Wilde was enamored with the theater, a Neptunian arena, and if we go back to his chart here, I'll let you take a look at that. An actress features as a pivotal character in Dorian Gray. After seeing her perform, Dorian describes her effect on the audience with, "She spiritualizes them, and one feels that they are of the same flesh and blood as oneself." Shortly after becoming completely entranced with Sybil, Dorian sees through the illusion of her stage persona to what we could describe as the real Sybil, or more accurately, a non-idealized version of her. Completely disillusioned, another Saturn-Neptune theme, he says to her, "You used to stir my imagination. Now you don't even stir my curiosity." So a pretty hard blow there. Saturn-Neptune is associated with seeing through the illusion or breaking the spell. Sybil replies to Dorian that he also had an effect on her. She says, "I saw through the hollowness, the sham, the silliness of the empty pageant in which I had always played." I could go on and on about Dorian Gray. There are so many great Saturn-Neptune correspondences. It's just an astrological treasure chest for thinking about this archetypal pattern. So if you want to explore more, I highly recommend it. I'd check out the newly released Harvard Press version, which is called The Uncensored Picture of Dorian Gray. In this version, this is Oscar Wilde's first version before it was published, so totally unedited. So before we go, I want to leave you with a few Saturn-Neptune keyword phrases to get you brainstorming about more ways Saturn and Neptune might interact in your own chart. So we could have the literal or real versus the imaginary or ideal, the finite versus the eternal or the infinite. We have metaphysical skepticism, ascetic spiritual practices, so see how those things can kind of reverse. Deconstruction of religious beliefs, or the dissolving of religious beliefs, Neptune applying to Saturn. Applying perseverance, Saturn, to stay true to your vision or your inspiration. Constructing reality out of inspiration, dreams, and vision. And giving freedom for dreams and inspiration to emerge by softening control, so Neptune influencing Saturn there. Manifesting the ideal by confronting illusion, delusion, and ungroundedness. Well, I hope this leaves you with a little food for thought. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.